There's a forestry boom going on in parts of Ireland, and it's one fuelled by hundreds of millions of euro of public money. The aim is to increase forest cover from the current 11% to 18% by 2050. The government's afforestation scheme was set up to grow the commercial timber industry as a mainstay of the rural economy. But it's also about climate change. In soaking up carbon, trees are a way to offset our greenhouse gas emissions and help the government to meet its legally binding EU reductions targets. But some people feel that forestry is being incentivised at the expense of farming. Fintan, from an ecological and environmental point of view, what is the issue that you have with this particular scheme?
Well, I suppose from Birdwatch Ireland's perspective, we're not anti-forestry. We'd like to see the right trees in the right place under the right management. I think the problem with the Irish government's strategy for forestry is that we have the worst trees in all the wrong places for biodiversity.
The worst trees? What do you mean?
Well, if you look at Ireland's national forest estate, 3/4 of that is made up of non-native conifers. Half of that, of the total forest estate, is made up of one species, Sitka spruce. But if you take a tree like that to Ireland, where it has no relationship with the insects, the plants, the birds here, it supports very low levels of biodiversity.
Vion is a private forestry company that manages over 200 plantations in the northwest of Ireland. Farmers who invest in these plantations may see it as a way to diversify their business and secure an alternative income. Under the scheme, the establishment of the forest is 100% grant aided, and investors receive an income tax-free payment for 15 years.
This isn't being forced on anybody up here. People volunteer to plant their land. There's nobody coming up here and saying you must plant their land. They apply and they say, I want to plant some of my land, and foresters facilitate that through the grant schemes.
But do you think it's a balanced way in terms of Leitrim having such an extent of forestry compared to other counties? For example, down in Kilkenny, down in Tipperary, where very little is going on.
Again, it's a supply and demand kind of thing. It's basically, if people don't want to plant in Kilkenny, they won't plant in Kilkenny. If they want to plant in Leitrim, they will plant in Leitrim. This is simply what's happening.
But not all the plantations are on farmers' own land. Many are on fields that were bought solely for the purpose of planting forestry under the scheme. Who is buying in Ireland?
Typically it's individuals who have money on that they would have in banks, and they're not earning any interest on that money, and they're looking to safeguard that money and provide themselves with a long-term return on that money.
And farmers buying?
Farmers, yes. We would have individuals, dairy farmers from the south of the country and from the east of the country who would be coming over and buying land in this part of the world, in Cavan and Leitrim and so on.
Aside from the amount of land which is being planted, there are also concerns about the types of trees being used, particularly Sitka spruce. Under the terms of the forestry scheme, which required approval from the European Union, the Department of Agriculture agreed that 30% of the afforested areas would be made up of broadleaf trees, such as oak, ash and birch. Currently, that figure is closer to 20%. Farm lobby groups have said that if the government wants farmers to plant slower growing and less immediately profitable broadleaf trees, then it needs to make additional payments. Until that happens, coniferous plantations are more financially attractive.
We would like to plant more broadleaves in Ireland, but we're not getting the land that should be planting broadleaves on. The better land for planting broadleaves would be, say, in the east of Ireland and so on and so forth, where the soils are better. But we're not able to get that. Hence, our broadleaf targets are fallen below the 30% that the state signed up to under the state aid rules.
From a broader environmental point of view, some people feel that using public money to pay people to plant forestry in places like this is the wrong approach to take. They say that these areas have important habitats that need to be nurtured and supported, and that left as they are more effective at removing carbon from the atmosphere than forestry plantations.
These kind of areas, the farmers are actually helping to protect a carbon store. It's also kind of land that we would consider as conservationists high nature value. So it supports important rare birds like curlew, which have declined by 96% over the last 20 years. All these kind of species that we really should be protecting, and we should be incentivising farmers to protect.
What you're saying is pay farmers for biodiversity, for public goods, don't pay them for forestry.
Absolutely. Public money for public goods. And the farmers that probably need the money the most are generally the ones that seem to be delivering the most public goods.
Marion Harkin is an independent MEP for the Midlands North West constituency. Although not opposed to forestry in this part of the country, she wants to see a change in emphasis in the way that it's done. So what would you like immediately to happen?
Well, first of all, I want an absolute commitment from the department that the 30% broadleaf planting, that they will deal with that straight away. That if that means they have to stop planting Sitka spruce or North American conifers for the next 6 months, year, whatever, that they will bring it up to the 30% level. I want to know for sure that proper planning is being followed, that if somebody looks for planning, that the cumulative effects of that is taken into consideration. And finally, I think the department needs to look at some kind of scheme that gives the same incentives to farming as they do to forestry. Nobody is looking for more, but just looking for a rebalancing, because otherwise, you know, in 10, 15 years' time, the landscape, it'll be covered in trees and people will look back and say, how did that happen? It's happening in front of our eyes.